How does the real-life Zandvoort circuit for the Dutch Grand Prix compare to the version we've got on the F1 2021 game? So, this weekend then is our very first opportunity to see F1 cars driving around in anger at Zandvoort. Of course, it was supposed to be on the calendar last year, but that race didn't end up happening. But we did actually get it in last year's game. It remains largely unchanged for F1 2021. But just how accurate is it? I mean, my first impressions of the track on the game was that the curbs were just wrong. You can barely use the curbs in the game, so I thought it must be completely wrong. So let's have a look then. Let's compare some side-by-side footage of Lewis Hamilton's best lap from free practice 1. I will say I'm using footage here from F1 TV from FOM. I'm hoping though this comes under fair usage because I've 3,000 frames from the lap and I'm only using 30 of them. I'm only using 1% of the original content. Hopefully this is also going to be transformed enough because it's very much not just showing you the lap. It's very much on the F1 game. That's the subject of this video, and we're just comparing it to real life. It's the official F1 game as well. We're also using Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton both, so fingers crossed we can get away with this one under fair usage, FOM. Don't do it to us. So for this comparison then, I'm going to be using the lap of Jarno Opmeer, the current F1 esports world champion, and he's in a lap on F1 2021 just about a month ago or so. Thank you to Jarno for letting me use his footage. Do check him out down in the description. But so we're going to compare his lap because my lines would naturally be different. He is going to have the best lines on the game, or certainly one of the best lines on the track. So we're going to compare his footage to Lewis Hamilton's onboard. As I said, we are just going to use freeze frames from Lewis Hamilton's onboard footage. So let's get going then. So the start of the lap, freezing it here in turn 1, and as you can see, I've kind of tried to match up the frames as closely as I can, and so far pretty accurate. I mean, obviously the sponsor's a little bit different, that's understandable, but actually, you know, the braking meter boards, the position of those, the fact that it's grassing outside, the barrier, the crowd on the left, it's all actually quite accurate. I will say for this one though, I am going to concentrate mostly on the actual track itself, not on everything around the track, just purely to stop this video from being too long. But obviously you've got the freeze frames there, you can make your own judgments. But in terms of the track, pretty much bang on in terms of the white lines as well that we can see on the inside. So let's move on now then to going into the turn 1. Let's get to the apex of turn 1, and here we go then, just freezing it there, and again pretty much right. I mean, I will say the gap on the game, the curb on the game does look a little bit taller, doesn't it? It looks a little bit taller, a little more aggressive. It looks a bit flatter in real life, but very, very similar lines from both drivers, interestingly. Pretty much the same line there. Again, the curb, the barrier, they're all very, very similar. Coming to the exit now, let's see how much curb we use. And again, quite a similar amount of curb. The curb does look quite different, but actually, in real life, it is that double curb that you see in the game. But in real life, they just painted it in a way to make it look like a bigger single curb. But you can just see a line down the middle there. So actually, the curb is the same. It's very, very bumpy in the F1 game. But Jarno is happy to use it here. So is Lewis Hamilton in the top right there. Again, the sponsors are a little bit different, but again, the shape of the track, the gravel on the outside, how close the barriers are, all pretty damn accurate so far. So largely the same, again using similar amounts of curb, which surprised me actually. I'm normally avoiding that curb, but that is why I'm not an F1 esports world champion. Here we go then, coming into what is turn 2, and again all pretty similar braking meter boards. Again though, the curb there on the game does look just a bit taller, doesn't it? It just looks a bit more sort of rounded and raised than it does in real life. In real life they seem to sort of have a bit flatter, but again similar lines, both not really using any curb. Coming into the apex of turn 2, similar sort of feedback here really. Curb looks a little bit bigger, but again very almost identical lines, really, really similar. Not too much else to look at on the apex here, but let's get to the exit and the turning point of turn 3. Now the lines differ quite a lot here. That could be a physics thing, that could be anything, so let's try and ignore the lines and just look at the track. Once again though, pretty similar. Again, the barrier being pretty close, a little bit of runoff there between the two, bit of grass on the inside, all looks largely similar. Coming into turn 3, and once again it is pretty different lines here, so it's kind of hard to judge, but again I will say it looks pretty much the same there. You know, we're slightly different parts of the corner because of the different lines, pretty much the same. On the exit here, interestingly, Jarno avoiding the curb. Lewis Hamilton happier to use a bit of curb. That is different. I do feel like the curbs are bumpier in the game than they are in real life. I think that's one of the key differences. But again, for the most part, Jarno is happy to use a bit of curb, which I personally am incapable of doing. But again, that's why I'm not an F1 esports world champion. And again, though, pretty similar, actually, pretty similar lines. Coming now then down this little, I guess if you can call it a straight, it's very much got a kink in it, but we'll freeze it there on what is turn 4. And again, pretty much the same. I mean, look at it, the barrier distance to the barriers, again, the sponsors are different, distance to the barriers. Actually, the curb there looks pretty much the same. It is quite a raised curb there. Again, almost identical lines through here. Nothing much really to judge on the right-hand side there. Nothing too much else going on. So let's go forward a bit more. Just, again, on the apex of what is technically turn 5, but again, actually, this is technically turn 6. There was 2 turns that we just had there. This is technically turn 6. And again, pretty much the same. We've not got the line in game, interestingly, the line that kind of creates the track there, but minor difference. Curbs, very similar. Barrier closeness, very similar. Grass, gravel, it's all very, very similar then. So let's now come into the turning point of what is turn 7. And again, pretty similar. In real life, I think that's grass on the outside. I can't tell if it's gravel or grass, really. It's only a 720p video they have on the F1 TV, unfortunately. But yes, we've got the grass on the outside there in the game. And then, yes, it's hard to tell. But again, pretty similar. There's no curbs there. All pretty damn similar, I will say. It looks like the gravel in the distance there is a similar sort of length. So slightly different barrier on the inside there, but that's not making a big difference. To stop it again on the apex here of turn 7. And again, pretty similar. Again, I will say the curb looks slightly flatter in real life, but actually minor difference. And again, almost identical lines, fascinatingly. These lines are a lot more similar than I was expecting. It's only been turn 3 we've really seen a different line. Coming out to the exit, and again there, Jarno, interestingly, happier to use more curb this time than Lewis Hamilton, who was staying off it. Of course, these lines might change slightly coming into qualifying, but I suspect that's more of a realism thing. I suspect at that speed, if Lewis Hamilton's on that curb, that will bottom out and it potentially damages floor, whereas in the game, particularly in time trial mode, you're just not worried about that. But again, pretty similar. Again, different painted curbs. Everything else looks so similar, though. We'll say similar sort of lines once again here on the apex of what is actually not technically a turn, but it's between turns 7 and 8 here. Again, pretty similar. The curb definitely flatter in real life there, though. You can see that there. You can see the raise, the bump in the middle there on the game, which doesn't really exist there in real life. Slightly different braking meter boards here, but that's not the end of the world. On the apex here of turn 8 then, and kind of similar, different curbs. We've got in the game we've sort of got a circular bit of curb there, and in real life there's just a bit of a sausage curb, but actually the actual apex of the corner quite similar. Again, real life it just looks a touch flatter. You know, there's not that kind of bump in the game. There's the curb literally goes from track and then it bumps up like that. Whereas in real life, it looks like it's a bit more of a gradual raise, although potentially the peak height is sort of similar. But again, largely, you know, similar lines here, both sort of more or less avoiding the curb. They've been right, just skimming it, but not really nailing the curb. Let's go then to the exit of turn 8, and again, very similar. Jarno using a little bit of curb there. Got a big double curb that's painted differently in real life, but braking meter boards all the same, barrier distance, largely the same. Even the line there, look, the line of tarmac off the track where there's a bit of grass that appears, even that is the same. So actually pretty damn accurate so far. Coming here then onto the apex of turn 9. Again, pretty damn similar. I mean, there's a bit hatching there in the game that's not there in real life. But again, pretty similar curve. There's a slight gap, I suppose, between the line and the curb in the game. Again, slightly different curve, but pretty damn close. The off-track stuff is fairly different, but again, I'd rather they concentrate on the track person, the actual track, than the off-track elements. Coming to the exit then of turn 8, turn 9 this is now. And again, pretty similar sort of feedback all through the track, really, isn't it? Curb's flatter there, flatter than it is. If the real life's flatter than in the game. Braking meter boards all largely similar. Distance to the barrier, off-track surfaces, all pretty similar. Turning point there, and again, look pretty similar. We've got the line across the track in real life. It's not there in the game. Even got the red inside coming up to the next turn. Gravel on the outside. The shape of the barriers. It's all pretty damn spot on, considering that this capture for the game, it was introduced in the game in July last year, which means they started working on it. Start of 2020 at the very latest, probably more like 2019. So accurate, so much later. Here then on the apex of where are we? Turn 10, and again, similar sort of feedback. Slightly different curb, slightly flatter in real life, but again, very similar lines here. Jarno then coming to the exit, bit of oversteer for him on the exit there, but out on the curb. Don't know if he intended to be out on this curb, but clearly this was a world record lap at the time, and he's happy to be out there, and he didn't lose too much pace. Very similar lines once again. The curb's slightly different here. The curb sort of goes into a single curb on the exit. Doesn't happen in the game. The DRS board just on the outside there once again with the line across the track. Very similar. The little kink in the barrier on the outside, even look. It goes from black to just plain metal on the outside there. You know, they've coated it in the F1 logos in the game, but that little bump of the barrier is there. Again, gravel on the outside, sort of grassy gravel on the game. On the outside. Coming down the back straight now with DRS wide open. DRS points are largely similar as well between game and real life. And again here, very similar. There's a bit of hatching on the outside, but a largely similar curb. In fact, that one's pretty damn accurate, that curb by the looks of it. Coming into the apex now then of turn 11. And again, almost identical lines. Different curbs. Look like we had before. There's a kind of a sausage there in real life rather than that sort of circular curb that they seem to have in the game. And again, I avoid that curb in the game, but I'm not an F1 esports champion. So that's why I wanted to get the lap of somebody that isn't me, because I knew my lines would naturally be different. Almost identical lines once again. And here again, very, very similar lines. I mean, again, that curb now looks a lot bigger, doesn't it? I don't know if it's the angle, but that curb looks actually really quite raised in the game, not in real life. But again, Lewis Hamilton isn't choosing to take that curb in free practice 1. Around the outside here, again, got all the grandstands. That's quite similar as well. Taking a bit of a late apex there for Jarno. Come on the exit. Hamilton much happy to use curb here. That's the sort of lines that I'm normally taking, avoiding the curbs because they're so damn bumpy in the F1 2021 game. But Hamilton happy to use them, so clearly difference there in the abrasiveness or the aggressiveness, I suppose I should say, of the curbs. Coming now then into the final turn on the circuit, which is going to be turn 13. Well, the final turn that matters, really. And again, the turning point, very, very similar. Grass on the outside. The curb starts late. We haven't got the line in real life. Gravel ahead of us. The apex all looks like, even the inside there where the black is, all looks very, very similar. And I tell you what, so far I'm really impressed. Let's hope it doesn't ruin it in the last 2 corners here. On the apex here, again, now the curb looks quite similar, slightly fatter maybe in real life, but very, very similar. All the gravel on the outside, very, very, very similar. Coming to the exit now, again, that's some curb there that I try and sort of avoid a little bit in F1 in the game because it is pretty scary to be bouncing over there, but Jarno's happy to do that with his setup. Hamilton again a little bit wider there, but again pretty similar. The curb goes down to single file there in real life. The barriers again coming in there. On the inside here, we've even got the Rolex branding on this corner. All damn accurate. Let's go now for the final couple of free frames here around the final turn on the circuit, the official final turn, which is turn 14, completely flat, of course, with the banking in Formula 1. So interestingly, we have a difference here. This is probably the biggest difference we've had all lap, which is saying something. We've got a curb on the inside there in real life that doesn't exist in the game. It's just grass. But again, if we ignore that, other than that, largely similar. The barrier is still pretty damn close. Taking very similar lines. There's no branding on the outside in real life, but again, that's a pretty minor difference there. Jarno keeps it tight here for the shortest run to the line, which is just a difference with the physics of the game. It's better to not to scrub the tyres a bit more, actually. And again, though, pretty similar. We've got the grandstand starting there. The pit exit line, the pit entry line, I should say. All very, very similar. And as we now come to the end of the lap, of Jarno Opmeer's lap to set his world record, which was a world record as it stood about a month ago or so. But how close was that? I was really impressed. As I said, having raced this track, I don't enjoy it in the F1 game. The curbs are too high, they're too bumpy, it's a pain. You have to try and avoid them, you have to try and navigate through the curbs. Clearly, Jarno is a better driver than me in terms of that. So I thought, you know what, the curbs are going to be so much flatter in real life. iRacing, which is a game I play a lot as well, I've got an older scan of this track before they added all the banking. And the curbs are really flat and it's actually a lot nicer. But actually, credit where it's due, Codemaster/EA, that is very, very accurate. I'll leave you guys to judge, the outside stuff, but obviously they might not have had a plan for that. But in terms of purely the track, the shape of the track, the barriers, the off-track surfaces, the curbs, very, very, very accurate. I will say the curbs are very slightly too high, I think, in the game, but honestly, it's minor. Even the lines are very, very similar between the F1 Esports Champion and the reigning Formula 1 World Champion. But anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you do enjoy this kind of content. I thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.